Terrifying true spring horror story. The Hartley family bought the old farmhouse in rural Vermont specifically for the gardens. After years of apartment living in Boston, Linda and Marcus Hartley wanted space for their two daughters, 12-year-old Sophie and 9-year-old Emma, to run and play, and Linda, a passionate gardener, dreamed of cultivating her own vegetables and flowers. The property had been abandoned for 3 years after the previous owner passed away, and the gardens had gone wild. But that's what made it perfect, Linda thought. A blank canvas. She could restore it, bring it back to life. They moved in on March 20th, the first day of spring, and Linda immediately began working on the gardens. The overgrowth was extensive. Brambles, weeds, and wild vines had taken over what had once been carefully maintained flower beds and vegetable patches. On their third day at the house, while clearing the eastern garden bed, Linda's shovel struck something hard. She dug around it, expecting a rock, but found instead a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, buried about 2 feet down. Marcus. Linda called her husband, who was unpacking boxes inside. "Come look at this." The box was old, rusted, locked with a simple padlock that broke easily when Marcus hit it with a hammer. Inside was a leather journal, remarkably well preserved despite the box's age, wrapped in oilcloth. Linda opened the journal carefully. The pages were filled with handwriting, neat, precise handwriting that belonged to someone named Margaret Ashford, dated 1973. The first few entries were mundane: garden planning, seed catalogs, weather observations. But as Linda flipped through the pages, the entries became stranger, more disturbing. March 28th, 1973. The garden is responding to the ritual. The growth is accelerating beyond what natural fertilizer would produce. The flowers bloom at night, even without sun. Harold says I should stop, that I'm disturbing something that should stay dormant. But the results are undeniable. April 15th, 1973. Something is wrong with the roses. They've grown 6 feet tall in just 2 weeks. Their thorns have grown larger, sharper. Today, I found a dead bird impaled on one of them. I don't remember this being part of the instructions. May 3rd, 1973. Harold is gone. He went into the garden last night after we argued. I heard him screaming, but couldn't find him. The garden has changed. The paths move. The plants have grown so dense I can't navigate through them anymore. I can hear him sometimes, at night, crying out from somewhere in the green darkness. But I can't reach him. The entries ended abruptly on May 10th, 1973. It's in the house now. The vines are coming through the walls. I was a fool. I thought I could control it, could use the old rituals without consequence. But spring wants what spring wants, and it's hungry. Linda closed the journal, her hands shaking. This is probably just fiction, creative writing or something. But Marcus's face was pale. Linda, the previous owner who died, do you remember the realtor mentioning her name? No, why? Because I looked up property records. Her name was Margaret Ashford. She died in this house in 2020 at age 73. If this journal is real, she'd written it when she was in her 20s. Linda felt cold despite the warm spring air. We should stop working on the gardens, at least until we understand what this means. But it was already too late. The gardens had awakened. That night, Linda heard sounds outside her bedroom window, rustling, scratching, the sound of something growing. When she looked out, she saw the garden had changed. The clear bed she'd been working on was now filled with plants, impossible plants that hadn't been there at sunset. They grew even as she watched, vines creeping across the ground, flowers blooming and closing in rhythms that seemed almost like breathing. Over the next week, the growth accelerated, no matter how much Linda tried to control it. Pulling weeds, cutting back vines, trimming branches. The garden grew faster than she could manage. The plants seemed to deliberately resist her efforts. Thorns catching on her clothes, vines wrapping around her tools, roots breaking her equipment, and the garden was getting closer to the house. Each morning, Linda would wait to find the green tide had advanced another foot toward the foundation, climbing the porch steps, reaching for the windows. Sophie started having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming about the green man who stood in the garden at night, made entirely of vines and leaves, watching the house with eyes like black seeds. Emma developed scratches on her arms and legs that she couldn't explain. "The flowers grabbed me," she insisted, though Linda tried to tell her it was just thorns catching on her skin when she played outside. Marcus wanted to leave. "We'll sell the house. Cut our losses. Something's wrong here. Linda, you read that journal. Whatever Margaret Ashford did, it's still affecting this place." But Linda couldn't leave. Despite the fear, despite the rational part of her mind screaming that they were in danger, she felt compelled to stay, to keep working in the garden. It was as if the plants were calling to her, drawing her out each day to tend them, to feed them, to help them grow. On April 30th, exactly 1 week before May 1st, Beltane, the ancient Celtic festival of spring, Linda found a section of the journal she'd missed before. Pages stuck together, now carefully separated, revealed a ritual. The spring awakening Margaret had written. "I found this ritual in my grandmother's papers." She was from the old country, Ireland, where such things were known and respected. The ritual feeds a land, makes it fertile beyond measure. But grandmother's notes included a warning I dismissed. Once awakened, spring doesn't sleep again. It takes what it needs to sustain itself. And what it needs most is blood and bone. Linda dropped the journal. She finally understood Margaret had performed this ritual in 1973 and had worked too well. The garden had become supernaturally fertile, but it had required sacrifice. Harold had been the first. Margaret had spent 47 years trapped in this house, tending the cursed garden, too afraid to leave, too consumed by what she created to stop. And now, by moving into the house and working the garden, Linda had renewed the connection. She'd fed the ritual with her labor, her attention, her blood for where thorns had scratched her. She'd awakened it again. That night, Linda tried to convince Marcus they needed to leave immediately, but when they went to pack, they found the doors and windows wouldn't open. Vines had grown over them, through the gaps, sealing them inside. The house had become a prison. "Mommy, the green man is at my window," Emma said, her voice small and terrified. Linda ran to Emma's room and saw it. A figure made entirely of plant matter, vines, leaves, flowers, and thorns woven together in the shape of a man. It stood in the garden, just outside Emma's window, and its seed-black eyes fixed on the little girl with unmistakable hunger. The garden wanted what all gardens want in spring: fertilizer, blood and bone to feed the soil. And it would take what it needed from the family trapped inside the house. Marcus grabbed his phone to call 911, but there was no signal. The vines had grown over the power lines, cutting them off completely. The basement, Linda said suddenly. Margaret wrote about the basement. She said there was a way to end it, but she couldn't bring herself to do it because it would mean destroying everything she'd grown. They found the basement door covered in vines, but Marcus hacked through them with a kitchen knife. In the basement, behind old storage boxes, they found another section of wall covered in vines. Behind those vines was a door, and behind that door was a small room that reeked of decay. In the center of the room was a stone, ancient, carved with symbols Linda recognized from Celtic mythology, and embedded in the stone were bones. Human bones. "This is the anchor," Linda whispered. "This is what's keeping the ritual active. Margaret buried part Harold here, fed him to the ritual. That's why it never stopped." Marcus stared at the stone in horror. "What do?" "We break it," It's the only way to end this. But breaking the stone would mean destroying the garden's power, and the garden knew what they intended. As Marcus raised a sledgehammer, the vines in the basement came alive, shooting toward them like striking snakes, wrapping around Marcus's arms, pulling him away from the stone. Linda grabbed the hammer as Marcus fought against the vines. She swung at the stone with all her strength. The first blow cracked it. The second shattered it. The effect was immediate and terrible. The house shook as if in an earthquake. Above them, they could hear the garden screaming, an inhuman sound, like thousands of voices crying out in rage and pain. The vines released Marcus and retreated, withering as they went, turning brown and brittle in seconds. The family ran upstairs to find the garden dying. Every plant, every flower, every vine was collapsing, rotting, turning to compost before their eyes. The green man at the window dissolved into a pile of dead vegetation. By dawn, the garden was gone, not overgrown or wild, but completely dead, as if winter had claimed it despite the spring warmth. The land was barren, scorched, nothing but dead soil and the skeletons of plants that had grown far beyond their natural limits. The Hartley family packed and left that morning. They sold the house at a significant loss to a developer who raised it and turned the property into a parking lot. Better that than risk another family moving in, Linda thought. But sometimes, on the first day of spring, Linda feels it, a pull, a whisper in the back of her mind, calling her to plant something, to dig in soil, to help things grow. She resists, keeps no garden now, not even houseplants, because she learned that spring isn't always renewal and rebirth. Sometimes spring is hungry, is greedy, is ancient and wild and dangerous, and some rituals, once begun, echo through decades, waiting for someone foolish enough to complete them. Margaret Ashford's journal sits in a safety deposit box, wrapped in iron and salt, buried where it can't influence anyone else. But Linda knows that somewhere, someone else will find another journal, another ritual, another promise of supernatural fertility. And spring will awaken again, hungry as always, ready to take blood and bone in exchange for unnatural growth. Because that's what spring is at its heart. Consumption disguised as creation, death feeding life, and hunger that never truly sleeps.